Welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. If you have problems with the IRS, don't focus on the negative, focus on the solutions. With the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish. For over 15 years, he's been helping taxpayers with IRS problems reclaim their lives and their financial stability. Now, here's your host of the IRS Solution Attorney Show, Darrin T. Mish.
Good morning and welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, joined again by...
I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Thanks so much for joining us today.
It is great to be here. It's nice and sunny outside. It's a beautiful day, and the traffic wasn't too bad this morning.
Oh, my goodness. Compared to last week, the traffic was awesome. All right, Pat, kill the music.
So,
I like that.
You're getting carried away there. If you and Charlie want to talk, we can just throw a microphone in front of both of you. Now they can't hear me. Anyway.
that would be very interesting, actually. And if you want to call the show and ask some questions or talk about IRS issues
Pressing
or whatnot,
matters.
Yeah, you can give us a call at 888-404-1010. That's 888-404-1010.
And if you're just catching the show for the first time, the mission of the show here with Darrin and myself is he's the expert with IRS issues. So every week we talk about things that have to do with the IRS, have to do with audits, have to do with all these crazy legal IRS terms.
Taxes and all those things that we like to talk about and think about in everyday life. I was telling Charlie, the station manager, this morning that, regular people, normal people, unlike me, don't think about taxes in the IRS all day and every day, but that's what I do, and that's what I've committed my life and my career and my profession to. So
even though you may be listening, you might not have a problem. You likely may know someone that does. So ask them to tune in here on Money Talk 1010. We're also on HD 99.5 FM2, a very sweet FM no static signal. It's lovely.
Yeah, that's really nice. I listen to that a lot of times on the way to and from the station so I can hear what's going on here at Money Talk
1010, and they actually have a lot of really great business shows as well.
Absolutely. Listen all the time. So today we're going to talk about 6 tips to protect yourself from IRS scams and tax fraud. There's a lot of that going on out there, and thought we'd bring you a show today talking about how to avoid it if possible.
Must be the season for scams in general, because I've been hearing a lot of that lately.
I think the season for scams and scammers is 365, 24/7.
Yes, probably. But perhaps we're just hearing a lot about it recently.
Yeah, I think with the advent of and popularity of social media, and we're on social media so much nowadays, I think that news like scams and whatnot and fraud, it just travels a lot faster than it would have.
Seems like even a lot of the books, I'm reading a book right now, and the first chapter in referencing, social media and how it relates to whatever they're going to talk about in the book.
Yeah, social media is just really an incredible phenomenon, don't you think? I mean, on the way to the station, I make sure to always make a post, make sure that people know where to listen live and whatnot, because that's where we're spending so much of our time. I find myself watching less and less television.
Right. You don't need to. Any breaking news story is going to be on social media.
Yeah, you're going to see it within 2 or 3 minutes of logging back on to Facebook or whatnot.
On
Very
Twitter,
true.
especially.
Yeah.
If you tweet
Yes,
and you want to
I do.
keep up, I think there are a lot of news stations that they follow Twitter all day long.
I'm a tweeter, yep.
Yeah.
Breaking news always
Yes.
happens on Twitter first. It does.
Yes, it does.
And businesses pay attention to Twitter.
Yes, they do.
So,
I know, because we tweet them when they don't act right.
I didn't really follow Twitter that much until I was watching a NASCAR race, and when Dale Earnhardt Sr. hit the wall and died, and I was on there, and an EMT posted it on there. He's gone, before they ever said, and they go, we hope the injuries aren't that bad. And
It was already on Twitter.
It was already on Twitter,
Yep.
yeah.
wow.
That's how it is. News travels so fast. And I don't know why Twitter is so different, but they really are.
It's instant.
And it was funny, myself and some friends in other states and other areas would tweet late at night, have a little bit of wine, and then these tweets, they would have the direct messages that weren't public, and then a couple of them had snafus where they went public. That was fun.
and even Donald Trump in using Twitter.
Yes.
And that guy has really leveraged that
All the political.
to the max.
Even Obama, all of them are using all the social feeds, especially Twitter.
So there was some interesting news story about Obama's, official Twitter feed was following some, perhaps inappropriate stars, XXX kind of people. And so thought that was kind of interesting. Obviously, he's not
Following, not being followed.
Right, not being followed because you can't really, prevent that. But they were following, which I thought was interesting because obviously the president isn't managing his Twitter account. Somebody is, and it's just kind of an interesting.
You'd be surprised. A lot of high-profile people actually do manage their Twitter account, and it's the only one they manage. Not always, but a lot of them do. Like, for example, Dave Ramsey. He personally manages his Twitter account.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Somebody else manages the other ones. But and if you follow his Twitter feed, like every now and again, he'll like throw somebody to the wolves and it's like, poof,
Not
massive.
that he's any giant,
tweet.
but Matt Lauer has spoken to my wife through Twitter.
Yes. Yes. You're a lot more, it's one of my friends wrote a book called The Digital Handshake. And the premise of the whole book is that, the CEOs of the big corporations no longer can hide behind the glass walls kind of thing. And Twitter has exposed that.
Several years ago, I was on Twitter and I was following sort of cyber stalking, an industry leader, and I'd had some limited interaction with him. And then I found myself sitting behind him at a seminar. And so I then kind of followed him around and kept trying to ingratiate myself into the conversation that he was having with other people. I finally did. And then that ended up being a very, very fruitful business partnership that made me quite a lot of money just because I had kind of ingratiated myself via Twitter.
Well, Twitter is a great way, like if you're at a conference, to catch a lot of things that maybe other people are hearing. Or if you miss the conference, you can follow the Twitter feed, like whatever the hashtag is, and it's just like you're there.
Yeah. I'm not really sure how we got into this extended social media
That's all right.
conversation.
Got to make it fun every now and again. Because not everybody will have direct relations with our 6 tips for protecting themselves against IRS scams and tax fraud.
So the first tip would be, ask before you share. So I don't know when this happened, but I remember when I was a child or, a teenager in the 80s when I got my Social Security number, it said right on the card not to be used for any other purpose. And somewhere along, I think that was the law, at least back then, and somewhere along the line, the Social Security number has been, used for more and more things by more and more private companies. And so the point of this tip is
almost your fingerprint nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. It's your exactly what they didn't want to happen. It's your single governmental identifying number. We've talked about this on the show before. Infants can't even get out of the hospital anymore before being assigned a Social Security number. I think that's a little bit Orwellian and interesting that the government wants that to happen so quickly. But just ask before you give, especially a private business, your Social Security number. If they don't need it, if they have some alternative, then don't share it with them. Because now, if someone has your name via social media, they could probably ascertain your date of birth. They're pretty close. They can probably get your address. Yeah, and then if they have your Social Security number, that's probably enough to steal your identity.
It's
at that
absolutely
point.
enough to steal your identity. Because let me tell you what, when we pull a credit report, that's all we need: your full legal name, your date of birth, your Social Security number, and your address. And guess what? If you own property or you have any public record stamp, boom, there's your address. Address probably on Facebook.
Exactly.
Social Security number and name, the rest is history.
So if you have a business address, you might want to use that on your social media so that your home address isn't so readily apparent.
And again, public records. So if you own property, it's going to be on there.
That's for sure. So people who are skilled in, searching public records in Florida, all of those records, like your deeds and mortgages and all those things are all online. I can find them within about, 30 seconds is probably too long.
So guard your Social Security number. So what about tax IDs? Do you think that falls under that same?
I don't think, the FEINs, the Federal Employer Identification Numbers, are quite as sensitive. If you don't have to use it, don't use it. But I don't think they're quite as sensitive because stealing a business's identity is quite a bit harder than it is to steal an individual's identity. At some point, I guess the government's, I'm not really for this, but I think the government's just going to have to come up with some extra security to maybe a PIN that's associated with your Social Security number.
They do actually on some of them, because I've had some that are going through the process to buy a property, and then what happens is in the state of Florida now, everyone signs the 4506T, which you're probably familiar with.
Sure.
So they can verify your tax transcript is the same as you gave the IRS. Well, these people were hijacking their information and actually filing a tax return to get the refund and intercepting it, cashing it. So by the time they actually get ready to file their own taxes, it's already been done. Yeah, so that they'll have a PIN.
Yeah, come to think of it, the IRS, for people who have made identity theft, sort of complaints, are assigning PINs to those taxpayers. But I was talking about more, like I think we'll all eventually end up with our own PINs. And it'd be kind of interesting.
Which we should have.
Yeah, if we could log into our own sort of Social Security number account somewhere and change that PIN whenever we wanted to. I think that.
I have a feeling it's a lot more advanced than the IRS is, but it would be a great idea.
When we come back, we can talk about the other 5 tips to protect yourself from IRS scams and tax fraud.
And watch out for the Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi. Just kidding. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. We'll be back in a few minutes. We'll do our best to make it fun and add a little bit of Twitter and Facebook and all that jazz in there. If you have a question for Mr. Darrin Mish that's related to the IRS or tax question, he can likely answer it for you. And you can reach him this morning at 888-404-1010, 888-404-1010. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back. You are listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show with Mr.
Darrin T, Mish, the IRS Solution Attorney.
And I'm your co-host, keeping the conversation fun, Katrina Madewell. Thanks for sticking around through the break.
I think she just said I'm not fun. I think that's what she said.
No, don't think. That's exactly what she said.
No, I didn't. I just got to, I can say the stuff the attorneys can't. That's all.
That is true. You say stuff that attorneys can't say just about each and every show.
I know. We got to keep it fun. So today's show is all about 6 tips to protect yourself from IRS scams and tax frauds. And the first one is ask before you share. Be a little bit guarded against that Social Security number.
Yeah, when you go to the coffee shop and they ask you for your Social Security number, you don't have to give it to them.
No.
It's just not necessary for them to have your Social Security number in order for you to buy an $8 cup of coffee.
I'm so guarded against that literally if I am in a coffee shop and not like at my office and someone's writing down their information to pull credit, I literally have them write it down just so they're not saying it out loud in a coffee shop.
Well, you don't think that's a good idea because there could be 2 Bobs in there or 2 Katrinas. So, write down the number right on the coffee cup there so that nobody gets...
Oh, stop it, Pat. He's always got something fun to throw in there, doesn't he?
Have you seen the meme on Facebook where a guy gave the person the name of Bueller and then left the coffee shop so that the person would be saying, Bueller, Bueller?
No, I didn't see that. I did not see
I
that.
only did that once.
You're giving him ideas here,
That's probably where I saw it. It's probably from Pat George's Facebook account.
So right on track is our second tip, which is watch the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, we're so accustomed to using free Wi-Fi all the time. You need to think about whose Wi-Fi you're using and if there's open ports and whatnot, if people can get into your computer or even intercept the information as it's going through their Wi-Fi. Also, there's a phenomenon where people are setting up fake hotspots where you're really sort of tapping into their computer in order to access the internet. And then if you're doing sensitive kind of stuff on your computer or on your phone or your device, then it's theoretically possible for that information to be intercepted and then used for nefarious purposes.
And at this day and age, there's just too much information on your computer, period. Whether it's something saved on your hard drive or in your email, it's just too much information. It's not even like it's what you're currently working on. It's anything in there.
Absolutely. And so once somebody can get your Social Security number, they can actually then try to file. The whole point of this show is that once somebody has your name and your Social Security number and your address, they can file a false tax return, attempt to claim a very large tax refund, and then you've got a problem. Because you're not going to get your refund because the way the IRS works is the first person who files is basically presumed to be the correct one.
Which is crazy and ridiculous because I just heard a story where that was so not the case.
Absolutely. And the Tampa Bay area seems to be the epicenter of this situation. I have a funny story about this. The Tampa police, I happen to know a detective who was, I think, peripherally involved with this story. He does a lot of, drug investigations and drug crimes. And they noticed that there was this one particular individual in the low-income area that was driving around in a chromed car. The car was literally chromed, the entire thing.
So, you're talking about Pat George's car. It was Pat.
Not my car.
So this guy's car is chromed, and they're like following him around, and he's not involved in any kind of drug activity, but he doesn't sort of fit the profile of somebody who would have the funds to pay for a chromed car, at least in their opinion. And so
14 karat gold.
So eventually they pulled him over and they found like hundreds of tax refund checks and like I forget how many credit cards. But this guy was engaged in this. He was like an early adopter of this tax fraud stuff, and he had figured out how to file false returns and claim very large refunds, and that's how they eventually caught him. Now, the irony is, so local TPD, Tampa Police Department, goes to the IRS, and they say, hey, we've got this guy. You need to prosecute him. And the IRS was sort of hands off. They didn't really know what to do, and they really, at first, didn't want to take any action.
The problem is they don't, because many times these crimes are committed in other areas. So then you have local police pointing at the other police in a different state, and they're going, it's an FBI matter, and guess where that ranks on the priority list?
Exactly. I once had a fraud problem. It wasn't tax fraud, but I had a fraud problem where somebody had stolen my identity and opened an account with Dell Computers, which I had never done business with, and ordered $8,000 worth of computers, and they were sent to an address in the Bronx. Well, at that point, I don't think I still
Karen's
have.
like, I've never been to the Bronx.
I actually had never even been to New York City at that point, and I still have never been to the Bronx. And so
there's some addresses that should just be flagged. Bronx, Miami.
There's some people in the Bronx right now listening and wondering what we have against them. But
we're
anyway,
not teasing. We're just,
so it was all these computers were sent to this address in the Bronx, and I didn't really know what to do. And I was an attorney at the time, so I called local police and I made a report. And they're like, "Yeah, what do you want us to do about it?" And I couldn't do anything.
In New York,
they said call NYPD. So I called NYPD, and how do you think that worked out?
They probably just hung up.
But no, they didn't hang up. But they were just like, we're busy with like real crime and stuff. So then and that was like kind of a personal mission. So I called the Secret Service, because the Secret Service, a lot of people don't know this, but the Secret Service has two jurisdictions. They protect the president, obviously. That's their most famous mission. But they also handle all counterfeiting and credit card fraud as well. So I called the Secret Service here locally in Tampa, and they're like, not really our thing. So then I called the FBI, and the FBI agent was really nice, talked to him for about a half an hour, and he just basically said, look, there's so much of this happening, there's just nothing that we can do about it. So I ended up spending, I think, about 30 hours just sort of cleaning it up. Like when I first called Dell and I said, hey, this isn't, I didn't open this account. They were very skeptical, and I had to write letter after letter after letter and in a certified mail and all that kind of thing.
Well, there's a fraud. I don't know if you listened to the show earlier this morning, the fraud that was going on with Robbie earlier, that apparently someone placed an ad and said, we need someone that would like to work from home and buy product for us for our company. So the person answered the ad, and they said, okay, we're going to send you a check. And what we want you to do is we want you to deposit it, keep $400 for yourself, and then send the $2,500 to this address. And it had Robbie's signature on it. That was close to his signature, had his name, and it had his account number.
I have to give kudos to my bank. I bank with the Regions, or my corporate account, and they are like spot on, man. They know if something's not right. They call. They know. They're just, and my signature is kind of hard to duplicate anyway.
And you really want to be with a bank that does that.
And I get text message alerts. So if anything wild comes through, I'm going to see it on my phone right away.
And I think the banks, I have a number of credit cards, and I've had a number of different credit card companies, banks, alert me to fraud. It's sometimes where I'm in Tampa and my credit card just got run in LA for gas, that kind of thing. And I don't know how they do it. I'm glad they do it, but it makes sense why they do it, because they're ultimately left holding the bag, and then all of us end up paying through increased fees and interest rates and things like that.
Especially for credit cards, because it's a loan. And if you didn't make it, you've got that protection. Bank account's a little harder. But
yeah, I think your debit card doesn't have quite the same protections as a credit card.
If you run it as credit, yeah.
But the banks seem to still be picking up the slack when that happens, even on a debit card, because they don't want the bad publicity and they want you to continue to bank with them and whatnot. So
absolutely,
I'm sure glad they do it. I don't know how they do it. I wish I kind of did know how they do it. How they could figure out that, when you jump on a plane this morning and you fly out to LA, for example, and I swipe my card for gas in the rental car, how do they know that's actually me? I don't know how they do it.
Well, for one, they're going to the chip technology, and it's picking that up. And for two, they can tell if the card is swiped or manually entered.
Well, in my case, what they had done is they had cloned a card that I had, and it was actually put in the gas pump. But I'm not sure how they know that, I agree with you now that the chips are coming out, but still only half of the plastic in my wallet has a chip on it. And some of it is like, business debit cards that I run substantial amounts of money through every month. So I'm not really sure how they totally do that. But like I said, I'm glad they do.
Well, I know the mine's really good about calling or messaging or texting if they think it's not me. So I got to give them kudos. But, we're on a first name basis. Get on a first name basis with your banker.
Yeah,
Might not be a bad plan.
That might be a little bit harder on some of the larger institutions, but I guess in your local branch that could work.
Exactly. And they got a lot of pull that can help you. All right. So tip number 3 in our 6 tips to protect yourself against IRS scams and tax fraud is protect your PC.
Absolutely. You need to have your password, you need to have your computer password protected. So, especially at work, I think, so that if you are accessing your personal information like we all do on our PC, that, anyone just walking by can't log on and look at your spreadsheet full of your passwords or your private financial information.
You know that we're so heavily regulated as real estate agents that when we have information stored in the cloud, like even if it's a contract without a lot of personal information on it, but anything, we have to have 2 passwords. So a password on my phone and then a password before you access Dropbox or wherever the cloud storage is.
I'm sure glad to hear that.
It's required.
Because real estate agents and mortgage brokers and that kind of thing, they really have a lot of your personal information.
Oh, yes.
For our clients, we definitely have enough.
Especially mortgage people. And the scary part is in the height of the market when things were collapsing, a lot of those companies went under, and so much information was just trash and not disposed of properly.
Sure, that makes sense.
Well, you're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show with Mr. Darrin T. Mish. I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Thanks so much for sticking around. We'll be back after the break. If you have a question related to the IRS or tax frauds or any questions of the such, we are in the studio today and we'll be delighted to talk to you. 888-404-1010, 888-404-1010. We'll be back in a minute.
And by the way, we just had a caller. She didn't have a question. She just wanted you to know, Darrin, she loves your voice.
Nice.
I saw you talking to somebody back there. I thought you hung up on him, Pat.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. What song is that, Pat? What is that?
So Pat's on the other side of the board there, and he is showing us his smiling face.
And he's smiling because we had a caller that said she loves your voice, Darrin.
Well, that's very nice. That's very flattering. I'm glad to hear that.
This is a good fraud song.
I've never heard it. Way before my time.
I think it might be before my time, which,
I know.
Which is sort of interesting.
Pat, you're dating yourself. Watch the songs you pick.
I like the song.
That's all I'm saying.
Careful of that handshake.
Be careful of the handshake. Well, that kind of leads into what we're going to talk about next, and that is, be skeptical. You should have a healthy dose of suspicion, at all times. Don't respond to unsolicited emails. I mean, this is really going on a lot. Like, I get emails just about every single day from, what purports to be the IRS. Now, here's a news flash.
They a lot of older people too.
Yeah,
I've
for
noticed
sure.
that.
Here's a news flash. The IRS doesn't use email. They use it internally, but you will never get an email from the IRS soliciting any kind of personal information. They just don't do it. They have not figured out how to do it securely.
That's a great tip of the day.
The other thing is, now this is really common, and this is going on. I've gotten these phone calls, and we get them at the office just about every day, like clients or prospects calling to tell us that they got one of these phone calls. If you get a call or a voicemail from somebody who says, the IRS is about to arrest you or file a lawsuit against you, or the sheriff is coming, or anything like that, that's a scam. You
and
can feel free to
ironically,
ignore
that
it.
happened to you.
It has
and your
happened.
wife.
It has happened to my wife. It's happened to me.
Of all the people to call.
I've actually got them on the phone live, and I had a ball.
I bet you
It was
did.
really fun.
Too bad you couldn't record that. That'd be really nice for air replay.
And what I did, because I'm kind of ornery, it was a Saturday morning too, and I was just kind of like,
let's have
lounging
fun with
around,
this.
and the guy calls me and he gets me out of bed, and so I started calling them back, and eventually they turned the phone number off almost immediately. So what they're doing is, I think they're in East Asia, so they're in Bangladesh and Pakistan and what's the other country?
All
over there?
those,
India,
yeah,
and
countries.
they just have sweatshops full of people making these fraud calls, and they have, their English is not exactly perfect. So, over in East Asia, they are raised learning to speak English, not American English. So they're just even their sentence patterns and their vocabulary will be, significantly different than here. And by the way, the IRS is not going to call you if they're going to file a lawsuit against you or arrest you. They're going to either file the lawsuit, and that's how you're going to find out about it, is you're going to get served with the lawsuit.
And then you call Darrin.
If by like some strange and unfortunate circumstance you're going to be arrested, they're just going to show up.
The feds are going to show up. That's the black badge people, or the black suit, gold badge.
Yeah, a whole bunch of people with gold badges and guns are going to show up, and they're going to put you in a car, and they're going to take you to jail. That's what's going to happen. But they're not going to,
for a little teeny tiny.
No, for sure.
Anything.
That's not that common. And they're not going to call you ahead of time and say, but if you give us $1,000, then, this will all go away. Now, I have told this story on the show before about the lady who gave who fell for one of these calls and gave this guy $30,000 worth of iTunes gift cards. Now, that one still has me scratching my head. I didn't know when the government started accepting iTunes gift cards as currency. I just don't even
know how the conversation could be so believable that someone would fall for that.
Yeah, so they must have been very skilled, and they prey on the elderly and the people who actually do have tax problems, because I get these panic calls from current clients not all the time, but quite frequently, where they say, Darrin, I thought you were handling this. I'm like, wait a minute, I am handling this. What are you talking about? And they said, well, somebody just called me and, he made all these threats. And I say, well, did he have an East Indian accent by any chance? And they say, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, he did. And I say, okay, well, that's just one of those scam phone calls, and kind of have to talk people off the ledge.
But the timing can be,
yeah,
a little good in some of these.
What's that saying? Even a blind squirrel finds a nut now and again. So if you have not filed your taxes and, for a long time, and it's kind of on the back of your mind that you're in a little bit of trouble, you feel like, and one of these people calls you, you're going to think it's real, because it is sort of real in your mind. So just be skeptical.
And I'm curious, if you're listening to the show and you have one of these stories or a scam or a call that you could share, we would really appreciate that. The call-in lines are 888-404-1010, or if someone has experienced that, 888-404-1010. And the topic for today's show is 6 tips to protect yourself against IRS scams and frauds.
And really, we're just kind of talking about scams and fraud in general now. So another thing to think about is, secure your personal items. Now, what I'm talking about is, the papers that you throw in the trash and you don't think that much of it. You can't do that anymore, because people actually go through the trash looking for
pre-approved credit card offers.
Exactly. So you got to get rid of that stuff. So I have a trash can story, because I have a story for everything, right, Katrina?
You always have a story.
So at one point early in my career, way before shredders were even a thing, and before this kind of fraud stuff was really a problem, we had done. We do a lot of direct mail, or we used to do a lot of direct mail to people who have tax liens. And so we had this giant stack of this direct mail that was spoiled somehow. There was a typo on the letter or something. So I'd say maybe 400 or 500 pieces of paper, and went straight into our trash, and in the office. And then a janitor or custodian or somebody took that trash and inadvertently put it in the wrong trash bin outside. And so what happened is, I don't know, a few hours later, the tenant of that, or the owner of that building that used that trash can came storming over and sort of plopped all this trash in front of me, and basically read me the riot act for using their trash bin. And it was at that moment, this is the early 2000s, late 90s, when I kind of realized, wow, I'm glad that wasn't client confidential information. That stuff really needs to go in the shredder. So that was my first sort of introduction to, you got to be careful when you put in the trash. Now, this stuff, by the way, was all public record. There was no client confidential information whatsoever. But that was
makes you aware.
That's when the thought occurred to me, wait a minute, I have to really be, clear about what's going into a shredder bin versus what's going into a trash can. So now at the office, we have shredder bins, and we use a company, and they not only do they shred the paper, but then they recycle the paper. There's absolutely no way that it could ever, any
I'll give you a
information could ever get
story
away
as
from the
well.
office.
When Chris, my husband, and I bought our first house, and at the time I was writing mortgage loans, so I did my own loan, but we bought a home with a builder. Builder's not around anymore, but this particular builder, took some basic information like our name, our address, our social, even though they weren't doing the loan. And they had an escrow check where we wrote, good faith deposit, which is kind of normal, right? So they didn't have a whole lot of information on myself or my husband, because we did our own loan. Well, when they cleared out the model center, they took all these files and folders from people that lived in the neighborhood, and they dumped them in an empty lot.
Oh, goodness.
And so this was a new neighborhood at the time, and a lot of them, word traveled fast. And that wasn't even really the social media days, but like people were literally knocking on each other's doors going, hey, you better come down here to this lot and check for your file, because there's a lot of personal information in here. And the next thing you know, there was like hundreds of people there. And then the guy who was the builder tried to send his assistant into the wolves den, and they're like, you're not taking any of this information back. You already dumped it. You didn't want it. Get out of here. This is our stuff.
Wow.
And I mean, the news was there. It was crazy.
What a great story. So yeah, you got to secure those personal items. You got to make sure.
And the bad part is they didn't have very much information of ours, but there were people who had files in there that had full tax returns, bank statements, all kinds of stuff in there.
Yeah, you have to scratch your head and wonder who thought it was a good idea to dump the paper in an empty lot.
All open.
You know? Yeah,
now there's, everything's so protected that it would almost, I would say, not happen. And you have more of a chance, like you say, the trash can story where you throw away a pre-approved credit card offer or something like that, with it happening in that instance than that story, which was many moons ago.
My personal opinion is really every household should have a shredder of some sort,
yes.
or some way to dispose of that sort of information.
And in my neighborhood, all the paper pays for the youth program, so we try to recycle as much paper as we can there. However, anything that's like personal or sensitive gets shredded. Like even in the credit card offers, like they'll have like a number on there that says you're pre-approved, blah, blah. I'll shred that one and throw the rest of the junk away with like what the APR is, and anything that has like my name or personal information or any way to steal identity.
See, you work harder than I do. I just throw that unopened envelope into the into the shredder
that's
bin.
so easy to put together.
No, I shred it. No, I put the whole thing into a shredder.
Don't you have to open the envelope, Darrin?
Jeez. Okay. Well, from now on, I'll open the envelope and donate all the junk paper to my local youth paper recycling center.
Yes, I will give you the address. So just to recap what we're talking about today, the 6 tips to protect yourself against IRS scams and tax frauds. Ask before you share. Don't readily give out your social security number. Number 2 was watch out for Wi-Fi. Number 3 was protect your PC. And number 4 was secure personal items. Number 5 is be skeptical.
And number 6 is check your default settings on your computer and specifically your social media sites, because that's why we were talking about the social media so much when we first started the show, is that a lot of the default settings, especially I think on Facebook, are pretty wide open. And the trend seems to be in the industry, in apps, in software programs in general, to allow the company to gather as much personal information as humanly possible, or in this case, not humanly possible, computer possible. And you just have to be careful, because the more and more of your information that gets out there in sort of the cyber stream, the more chances of some company that you do business with, like Target, for example, has a cyber breach, and now your identity information is all over the place. It ends up in Russia and the Ukraine and these Belarus, these countries in Eastern Europe, China, where the U.S. government can't really reach them. And that's what I think happened to me with my identity theft issues, is that I think that, I buy a lot of stuff online. I think that somebody had a data breach, and my identity information just ended up out there on the internet. So consequently, I have to use a monitoring program so that I'm aware instantly when anything happens on my credit file, any new accounts or anything like that. I happen to use one called Credit Check Total. There's LifeLock. There's a whole bunch of companies like that.
You could use like a prepaid gift card too that has MasterCard or Visa or something like that, and that would, and just transfer a certain amount of money for whatever you're buying online.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you've already had a problem and you're gun shy, you can definitely use a prepaid gift card or a credit card if you need to.
And the other thing too, talking about this, like in the earlier days of like Facebook and such, all that information was out there. They've changed it to where now you have to like reset the defaults of what people can see. But before they did that, there's companies like Spokio and some of these that went in and basically swooped all this information, and now they just have it all there and they sell it. Now they resell that information to
people.
And
a lot of that information shows up on Google. If you have an uncommon name, it shows up on Google on the first page of results, and it'll tell you, it'll tell the user the name, the age, the address, known associates, all kinds of scary information that you don't normally think of as being public or available to the public.
So you're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. We are going to answer a couple of questions that we got from our listeners after the break, and then we'll get into the train wreck of the week. If you have a question, call in 888-404-1010, 888-404-1010. We'll be back in a minute.
Are you suffering from IRS problems? Do you owe back taxes you can't pay? Is your paycheck or bank account being levied? Or maybe you haven't filed tax returns in years and simply don't know what to do. This is Darrin T. Mish to tell you that if you're tired of IRS problems hanging over your head and are ready for a fresh start, we may be able to help. Call the law offices of Darrin T. Mish at 888-GET-MISH, 888-GET-MISH, I can help you file old tax returns, work to release tax liens or stop wage levies, even negotiate deals to pay off back taxes at a discount, sometimes for pennies on the dollar. Hey, let's face it, these days it's not hard to get into tax trouble. A divorce, failed business, health problems, you name it. The point is, IRS problems may be solved if you're willing to take the first step. Call for a free consultation at 888-GET-MISH. That's 888-438-6474. Or go to the web at getirshelp.com, because the one sure thing is, IRS problems don't solve themselves. So get Mish. 888-438-6474. Principal Office, Tampa.
You stinker, Pat. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I'm your host, Katrina Madewell, and Pat George back there on the board likes to just pop the mics on when Darrin and I are chatting during the break.
Trying to catch her.
So you're going to catch me.
So we were chatting on the break, and lucky for us, there's these bright red lights that come on above the microphones that were basically right in front of our face, and so he did not successfully catch us.
I don't catch you too much, but I can catch her.
No, you don't. He thinks he does.
I'll get you on your show tomorrow.
Okay, you get me. You do that. We're giving away Journey tickets tomorrow, so you might want to tune in.
Journey. Now, that dates us a little bit.
Going to give us some 4 packs of Journey tickets.
Remember, if you have an IRS tax debt, you just can't stop believing that it will get better.
Come on, Pat. Cue it up. What's the matter with you? You're slowing down.
Touch and squeezing.
No, unless you're married to an IRS employee, I don't think we need to talk about loving, touching, and squeezing.
So we had some questions.
That lady on the phone earlier wanted
she like Darrin.
It's all good.
If you have a question, you can call in at 888-404-1010, 888-404-1010. We have a question from Jimmy. He says, I had an offer in compromise accepted by the IRS 5 years ago, and I'm in serious jeopardy of defaulting on my tax payments for this quarter. What should I do? Before you do that, explain what an offer in compromise is.
An offer in compromise is where you can make a deal to settle for less with the IRS. The amount of the offer is based upon a fairly simple math equation that I'm not going to go into. But one of the requirements for an accepted offer in compromise is that you stay current for 5 years, which means you file your tax returns and you pay your tax debt, if there is one, for 5 years. Otherwise, it defaults, and all of the tax that was compromised in the offer in compromise will come roaring back. Now,
so Jimmy's question is, it looks like it's been almost 5 years ago.
I think Jimmy's probably in decent shape because it sounds like he's talking about his quarterly estimated tax payments that he's in danger of being late on. I have never seen an offer in compromise defaulted for a late quarterly payment. But what I would suggest to Jimmy is that if you're going to owe for a particular, for this tax year, then what I would encourage you to do is file an extension so that you can file that return later and work on paying that tax liability during that 6 months. Now, if you just can't do it and you just can't pay it off before that 6 months, go ahead and file the return. And if there's a balance due, the IRS is going to give you a chance, maybe even 2 chances, to cure that default and pay that tax debt off, because believe it or not, the IRS actually wants you to succeed if you have an accepted offer in compromise. They invested some time and money and effort into getting you back into the system, and they actually do not want you to fail. Unlike lots of other government types of situations, in this situation, the IRS doesn't want you to fail. So they're going to bend over backwards. They're going to give you some chances to cure that defect if you're in fact have tax liability, that come up that you can't pay. I have seen it happen before, and in one case that I handled, taxpayers had actually had an accepted offer in compromise, defaulted on it. I filed a second offer in compromise, and the IRS accepted it again. And they were successful in keeping that second offer in compromise.
But if you get that deal, you probably shouldn't screw it up. I'm just saying.
Please don't, because it's one of the deals of the century. You want to make sure you take advantage of that and not blow it.
And Missy has. We didn't get to Missy's question. All right, Missy will answer your question right after the train wreck of the week.
So it is that time, the time for this segment of the show, which is I call the IRS train wreck of the week. It's about a client who came in with an IRS train wreck, meaning they owed more money to the IRS than they thought they could afford to pay. And they always leave with a happy ending. In this particular story, I had an attorney come in, and she was a very, very busy, trial attorney, litigator type. And she was always traveling around the country trying cases and defending, her clients. And so she just was too busy to file tax returns. And I know that sounds kind of funny if you're not, in that situation, it sounds kind of bizarre. But she was always getting a W-2 and had essentially proper withholding and maybe a little bit too much tax withheld, but she just could never get around to filing her taxes. She had gone through a divorce and a custody thing, and there was all these things that had occurred in her life. So when she came to me, she had not filed for, 8 or 10 years, and we were working on toward getting her caught up. Well, in the meantime, the IRS went ahead and issued what are known as notices of deficiency for tax years 2009 and 10. What happens is if a taxpayer doesn't file a tax return, the IRS will eventually get around to filing a tax return for them. It's called a substitute for return. We call them SFRs. And SFRs almost always reflect a much higher tax liability than is accurate, than is real, because what the IRS does is they just add up all the income, they multiply it by the tax rate, no deductions, no exemptions, and they just whack you with a big bill. And then there's really incredible interest and penalties that accrue as well. In this particular case, this individual ended up, the IRS was asserting that she owed $209,516 and change. So over $200,000. And so this was quite, a shocking revelation for her that the IRS would be this aggressive, because she had gone many years with nothing happening at all, just absolutely nothing. And then to get this in the mail, certified mail, is sort of shocking. So what we did in this particular case is we filed tax court petitions. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to stop the IRS from going any farther, from actually assessing the tax. Because the IRS in this type of situation cannot just unilaterally say you owe us this money and start to collect it. There's certain due process sort of things they have to go through. So we filed tax court petitions. We filed original returns. And guess what?
To get money back?
She had refunds due on both of those tax years. So we ended up zeroing out the $209,000. She didn't owe that at all. Now, the bad part of this story, or the unfortunate part for her, is that she was not entitled to the substantial refunds for both of those tax years because
it was over the time period. What's that number of years again?
It was over 3 years late, and so she was not entitled to those refunds. And I think the refunds were like over $20,000.
Oh my gosh, that would make me throw up.
But she was really happy that she was finally all caught up. She doesn't owe $209,000. And, would it have been nice to get those refunds? Sure. But she understands in the big picture, it was her, negligence that she didn't file her tax returns. And so now,
got to give her a bookkeeper phone number.
But here's the great thing. She's all caught up. We're going to do her taxes, forever now. And, she's back in the system. So, congratulations to her.
All right, so real quick, Missy has a question. She wants to know, how likely is it that the IRS will seize her new car because she wants to buy one? She says that she has an old one that just died, and because her commute time is extended every day, is it better off to buy an older car that costs less, or will they take her car?
I have never had a client with a car that was seized. One time I did have a client who owned, he was a corporation actually, and the only asset left in this corporation that had a pretty big tax bill was a paid off Corvette that was worth about $25,000. So they didn't seize that car, but in general, Missy, I don't think you have to worry about it. I don't think they're going to seize your car, and you're probably not going to have any equity in the car anyway.
All right, you're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. Sorry to rush through that, but I know any second we're going to get cut off, so we're staring at the clock. Thank you so much for tuning into the show today. We'll be here every week, same time, same place. If you have an IRS question or you know somebody that does, call us. We'll be happy to answer it for you. Darrin the expert will chime in. 888-404-1010, 888-404-1010. Tune in for Tampa Home Talk tomorrow at 9.
And for today, we're out.